Okay, Isaac, I've got your work up right here. I'm going to pull that down here so we can take a look at it. I want to start by just kind of drawing your attention over to the course announcements. So these four announcements here are really super important. I want you to look at all of these, view them, and review them. A lot of videos in here, a lot of tips and tricks and things to look out for. The Welcome to Week 2 has 4 videos in it. I want you to review all of those. One of them specifically deals with how to kern fire and ice, and another one it explains how to transition from this kind of manual kerning that we've been practicing to kerning on the computer. So you definitely want to, I recommend reviewing these before. If you haven't already reviewed them, definitely review them before your final iteration. If you've already reviewed them, review them again. You can't watch these things enough. I'm telling you what, they're just wonderful resources. This document right here is from one of those. It's from Welcome to Week 2, specifically the announcement how to kern fire and ice. This is a document that I've created, and I consider this to be a culmination of 30 years of typographic experience in setting this up to be perfect letter spacing, perfect kerning. So we'll use that for example, right? Feel free to take a screenshot of this and use it for your final iteration. So what we want to do is we want to take this and compare the two. All right, the first thing we see over here is fire and ice. We can see that the page is kind of pointing in like this. We can see that by this and this. And the reason for that is that's called keystoning. It's a distortion caused by the digital photograph. If you're not going to use a computer, it's perfectly fine to use your phone to shoot the work if you don't have a scanner. But when you're shooting your work, you want to make sure that the camera is directly above the work and that you're holding it perfectly level. If you distort it all or shoot it from an angle, you're going to create distortions. And as we can clearly see, these distortions create this kind of effect where things are slanted from a kind of a single point perspective. So this seems to be slanted this way, while these letters seem to be slanted this way. So definitely you want to hold that camera still and reside directly above the work when you're shooting. Okay, let's bring that document back and let's go ahead and take a look. So I think that we're really, really wide here, both in our letter spacing and our word spacing. I think this word spacing here is pretty good, and I'll address that in a second. But you seem to have a decent depiction of letter forms. Not perfect by any means. I mean, this is really wide through here, whereas it's not that wide through here. Good job showing that variable with stroke, but not quite enough, because how narrow that branch of the cap N is as it moves into the that portion of the end, that vertical branch of the N, right? So you wanted to make sure that you're depicting those letter forms to a high degree of accuracy. So let's go ahead and take a look at spacing. Right now, all of your spacing is entirely too wide. You've got huge gaps between all of your letter forms. Okay, we want to close that down. Remember these rules of type that I had given you last week in terms of the most narrow space being between two curved letter forms, followed by the next most narrow between a curve and a straight, and then the widest between two straights. So you definitely want to pay attention and apply those rules expeditiously. Now, and again, let me see. Some of your vertical stems here are not true verticals, so definitely watch that. Okay, so as far as kerning goes, you can use this. Take a screenshot of this, and you can kind of base your kerning on this. But let's look at word spacing. This space right here seems to be pretty good, but this space here is huge. What does that cause? That causes this. It causes a natural break there. So instead of reading this as fire and ice, we read it as fire and ice, which can actually even change meaning. So we want to pay attention to this space right here. The reason this space seems to be so wide is because you've got open counter here and an open counter in here. Remember, our kerning and spacing rules indicate that with open counters, you want to close that space down a little bit more to eliminate the illusion of there being more surface area caused by those open counters. This is a perfect example of that. So you want to reduce this space a little bit. Follow this as your model. See how we read this? Just kind of look at it, and we don't even really have to read it or pronounce it. It's just boom, fire and ice. We recognize it. What happens with an extra space is that we no longer are able to look at this and have it register as fire and ice. We automatically want to pause where that space is, changing it from fire and ice to fire and ice. Okay, so those are my recommendations. Don't forget your overshoot. Okay, overshoot is covered in week 2 lecture. Overshoot states that curved letter forms should reside below, just a little bit below the baseline and above the mean line, and curved uppercase letter forms should reside a little below the baseline, a little bit above the cap line. And we can see overshoot depicted here in these curved letter forms, both mean line and baseline, but we don't have those depicted here. So you definitely want to depict overshoot in your final iteration. Okay, those are my recommendations. Nothing major, but you definitely want to watch your craft too. We got some smudges and some wrinkles in the paper that we probably are not optimal at this point. Remember, craft counts. Okay, so at this point, those are my recommendations. I'd like to see you apply those recommendations to your final submission due Sunday. And if you have any questions at all, please let me know. Great. Thank you, Isaac.